Sometimes, dead is better. That's the phrase you'll hear whispered again and again throughout this dark, twisted story. And by the end, you'll understand why. Tonight, I'm going to take you deep into the cursed world of Pet Sematary, one of Stephen King's darkest, most terrifying novels. A story about death, grief, and what happens when you try to reverse the irreversible. So turn off the lights, grab your headphones, and let's begin. It started with a move. Dr. Lewis Creed, a middle-aged physician, his wife Rachel, their 5-year-old daughter Ellie, their infant son Gage, and their pet cat Church, were relocating from Chicago to the small, sleepy town of Ludlow, Maine. The new house was everything they'd hoped for. A beautiful, large old colonial property, surrounded by woods, with a long driveway leading to a quiet road. Felt perfect, almost too perfect. But what they didn't know was that this place had a history, a long, bloody history. On their very first day, Lewis met Judd Crandall, the elderly neighbor across the road. Judd was kind, welcoming, and had lived in Ludlow his entire life. He became a sort of grandfather figure to the Creed family, but there was something in Judd's eyes, a shadow of something unspoken. And then, Ellie saw it. While playing outside, Ellie spotted a narrow path leading into the woods. A path that Judd said had been there since before he was born. The path, Judd explained, led to a pet cemetery, a place where generations of Ludlow's children buried their beloved animals. Lewis, being a doctor and a man of science, wasn't particularly superstitious. But when Judd took them down that path, he noticed something strange about the way the forest seemed to hold its breath. The trees leaned in a little too close. The wind sounded like it was whispering words he couldn't quite understand. The pet cemetery was a strange, haunting place. A circular clearing in the middle of the woods, marked by makeshift graves, tiny crosses, crude headstones made from rocks, some dating back over 100 years. Ellie was fascinated, asking endless questions. But Rachel, she hated it. Rachel had a complicated relationship with death. As a child, she'd witnessed her older sister Zelda die of spinal meningitis. A horrific, traumatic experience that left her with deep, unresolved fears about death and dying. The very idea of a cemetery made her skin crawl. Lewis didn't press it. He figured it was just a harmless local tradition, a way for the town's children to cope with loss. He had no idea how wrong he was. A few months later, tragedy struck. Church, Ellie's beloved cat, was found dead on the side of the road. Lewis was devastated, not just because of the loss, but because he'd promised Ellie Church would be fine. He wasn't ready to explain death to his little girl. That's when Judd made an offer. An offer that would set off a chain of horrors no one could have predicted. That evening, after putting the kids to bed, Judd called Lewis outside. The old man's face was pale, and his voice was quieter than usual. "There's another place," Judd said, "beyond the pet cemetery. A place the Micmac tribe once used. A burial ground, but it ain't natural." Lewis, confused and grieving, followed Judd deep into the woods, past the old pet cemetery. The path twisted and climbed into the hills. The air grew colder. The trees looked older, their branches twisted like claws. Lewis felt something heavy pressing on his chest, as if the very earth wanted him to turn back. But he didn't. They arrived at a stony clearing, the Micmac burial ground. The ground was rocky, the earth dark and dead. There was an unnatural silence. Even the insects refused to make a sound. Judd told Lewis to bury Church there. "But why here?" Lewis asked. Judd wouldn't say. He just told him to do it. And wait. The next morning, Lewis awoke to find Church back. But something was wrong. The cat looked the same, but its eyes were different. They glowed with a strange, unsettling yellow light. Its fur was matted, it smelled of earth and rot. And its behavior. Church was meaner, more aggressive. It would stare at you like it knew things it shouldn't. Lewis tried to convince himself it was just trauma from being hit by a car. But deep down he knew. This wasn't the same cat. And so life went on until the real horror arrived. Months later, a terrible accident happened. While the Creeds were having a picnic in the front yard, little Gage, Lewis's 2-year-old son, wandered into the road. A speeding truck, a sickening thud, and silence. Gage was gone. The grief shattered the Creed family. Rachel was inconsolable. Ellie had nightmares. And Louis. Louis slipped into madness. At the funeral, Judd pulled Louis aside. "Don't do it," he whispered. "That place, it's bad, Louis. What you bring back, it ain't the same." But Louis couldn't let go. The memory of Church's return haunted him. What if it worked? What if he could bring Gage back too? Louis Creed was a man unraveling. Night after night, he'd sit in Gage's empty room, staring at the little clothes, the toys that would never be played with again. The house felt colder. Every sound in the night seemed heavier. And Church, the resurrected cat, watched him constantly, as if it were waiting. Rachel had taken Ellie to her parents' house to help them cope. But Louis, he stayed behind, and the idea took root in his mind. The Micmac burial ground. If it worked once, maybe it could work again. Judd sensed it. The old man began watching Louis carefully, warning him again and again. "That place is sour, Louis. Whatever's buried there comes back wrong. It's evil." But grief deafens a man. And on a stormy night, Louis made his move. He dug up Gage's small coffin from the cemetery. The very act of it twisted something inside him. The storm above seemed to roar in protest. The earth clung to the child's body, as if unwilling to let it go. But Louis was beyond reason. He carried the tiny, lifeless form through the woods, past the pet cemetery, and into the forbidden place. The Micmac ground was cold. Dead cold. He buried Gage there, whispering desperate promises to his son. "Come back to me, just like before." Then he waited. And if you're still watching this in the dark, hit that like button and subscribe now. Because trust me, the next story is even darker. It didn't take long. In the dead of night, as thunder rattled the windows, something scratched at the door. A soft, dragging, unnatural sound. Louis opened it, and there stood Gage. But it wasn't Gage. The child's face was pale, marked by the wounds of the accident. His eyes were sunken, glowing with a malevolent light. The little boy grinned, a twisted, knowing grin far too old for a child. "Hi, Daddy," it whispered. Louis's blood turned to ice. And then, the murders began. Judd was the first. He heard something moving in his house that night. A giggling, childlike sound. But when he turned, Gage was there, a scalpel clutched in his tiny hand. Judd barely had time to scream. Then it was Rachel. She'd returned home, sensing something was wrong. But Gage was waiting. The house reeked of death and rot. Rachel followed the sound of tiny footsteps, calling out for her son. And when she found him, the last thing she saw was the gleam of a blade. Louis found the bodies the next morning. Judd's house was soaked in blood. His wife's lifeless form lay in Gage's room, her face frozen in terror. And Gage was sitting on the floor, playing with a severed doll's head. Louis knew what he had to do. With a trembling hand, he prepared a lethal dose of morphine, enough to put down an elephant. He approached the boy. Gage grinned. "No fair, Daddy," the thing whispered. And Louis did it. The house fell silent once more. But madness is a cruel thing. Louis, now completely broken, gathered Rachel's body and carried her deep into the woods, back to the burial ground. "This time it'll be different," he told himself. "I was too late with Gage. But with Rachel, it'll be fine." He buried her there, in the cold earth, and waited. That night, a soft knock at the door. Louis smiled. The handle turned, and a decayed, bloodied hand slid into view. "Darling," Rachel rasped, and then fade to black. To truly understand the horror of Pet Sematary, you have to step inside the crumbling mind of Louis Creed. Louis wasn't a bad man. He was a doctor, a man of science, logic, and reason. The kind of person who believed everything in life had an explanation, until life delivered a tragedy so brutal, so unfair, that no explanation could ease the pain. When Gage died, it wasn't just the death of a child. It was the death of Louis's sanity. Grief is a strange thing. For some, it comes in waves. For others, it's like a constant weight on the chest. But for Lewis, it became an obsession. He began to believe, truly believe, that the natural order of life and death could be bent, twisted, or even reversed. And in that belief, he started to decay. He stopped sleeping, stopped shaving. He would talk to church, the resurrected cat, as if it understood him. His medical training, his logic, his rationality, all crumbled under the suffocating weight of grief. There's a dangerous kind of madness that grief can trigger. A belief that if you just try hard enough, if you love someone deeply enough, maybe, just maybe, you can cheat death. And that's what Lewis did. But what made it worse was hope. Church came back. Not quite right, but alive. And that flicker of impossible hope took root in his mind. He began to think the rules didn't apply to him. That maybe Gage's death was a mistake nature would allow him to correct. This wasn't love anymore. It was desperation. Judd Crandall, the old neighbor, saw it happening. He'd seen it before. He knew what the burial ground did to men. And he tried to warn Lewis. Whatever you put in that ground ain't what comes back. But grief deafens a man. And here's the cruelest part. Even after watching Gage return as a murderous, twisted mockery of his son, even after losing his wife the same way, Lewis still wasn't done. His final act of madness was believing, this time it'll be different. That somehow burying Rachel would bring her back clean. That maybe love could purify what death had tainted. It's one of the darkest truths Stephen King ever wrote. Sometimes dead is better. But men like Lewis Creed learn it too late.